Alright, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Askadeo Reski Gunawan, and today I'm gonna present about Papua, the international response towards the issue, and how Indonesia failed to stop the internationalization of the issue. First, of course, I'm gonna explain about brief history of the conflict, then highlight the international community's response, the U.S., China, and the neighbors, and how Indonesia failed to use its foreign policy to stop the internationalization of the issue. Um, let's begin. First of all, West Papuan nationalists argued for their right to independence following the renouncement of Dutch control over Indonesia. However, they ultimately failed. West Papuans were denied independence also because the UN system failed to heed their calls and instead placed Indonesia above its commitment to decolonization and human rights. After an interim period of UN administration, the Netherlands and Indonesia signed an agreement to transfer control of West Papua to Indonesia in 1962. The agreement included a provision regarding requiring Indonesia to consult the population of West Papua on whether or not they wanted to remain part of the republic. After an intense campaigning by West Papuans, Indonesia finally announced it would conduct this act of self-determination in 1969. Yet, when the referendum came, Papuans were once again denied a voice in the future of the territory. As the UN was excluded from most of the process, Indonesia went unchallenged in allowing just over 1,000 hand-picked individuals to vote on behalf of the entire West Papuan population. Under this rigged system, the men unsurprisingly voted in favor of becoming part of Indonesia. At the UN General Assembly meeting to ratify the Act of Free Choice, many African representatives were unwilling to back it without debate as they believe it undermined the UN's principles of decolonization. They highlighted the hypocrisy of establishing the non-aligned movement with the explicit aim of opposing colonialism and then allowing Indonesia to set up colonial style rule in West Papua. However, despite this debate, no delegate was willing to vote against Indonesia. The assembly voted to accept the Act of Free Choice as it was in a vote of 84-0 with 30 abstentions, noting that it fulfilled the requirements and the UN responsibilities of the agreement. While the West Papuan had convinced African leaders of their desire for self-government and the unjust nature of Indonesia's control, the African representatives were unwilling to openly vote against Indonesia and break their alliance in the Afro-Asian bloc. To stand against Indonesia would endanger their political standing and protection in the international community. Delegates instead chose to abstain. Moreover, regarding the superpowers, Indonesia's current administration prioritizes massive infrastructure development, which is in line with China's global development strategy. According to Li Wei, Indonesia needs Chinese investment. In return, China needs Indonesia for its global expansion. Thus, China doesn't want to upset Indonesia as Chinese infrastructure and investment interests in Indonesia are at stake. The lack of response, however, from China on the Papua issue is also probably because the China government has been traditionally less interested in human rights issues. Liu further noted that at the same time, to protect its global interests, the US recently launched its Indo-Pacific Strategy Report, in which Indonesia's geographical position is important, as well as having economic interests such as the Freeport investment and mining production in Papua. The US perceives Indonesia as critical to stability and progress in Southeast Asia, a key region in its Indo-Pacific strategy. These bilateral relations with Indonesia serve the geopolitical players' interests well. They see no reason to upset their relationship with Indonesia by offering criticism on the West Papua issue. In Australia, Human Rights Watch has voiced concerns over the situation, but the Australian government have not been as vocal. As for ASEAN nations, they are barred by the bloc's non-interference principle from even insinuating concern about Papua. Recently, although thousands of people in uh, Papua New Guinea held a solidarity march in support of West Papua, the government of Papua New Guinea only regards the issue as an Indonesian domestic problem. The distrust towards Jakarta among indigenous Papuans, dating from the controversial 1969 referendum, fortifies ethno-nationalist aspiration to secede from Indonesia. In order to tame these sentiments, the security apparatus has taken a repressive approach towards indigenous Papuan descent, but repressive actions by police and military forces have instead strengthened Papuan separatists' aspirations. The challenges that many Papuans have faced in expressing their political, economic, social, and cultural rights have drawn close attention from the international community, including in recent times from a group of Melanesian countries united under the Melanesian Spearhead Group Initiative, the MSG. In 2015, the MSG granted observer status to the United Liberation Movement for West Papua. It's an organization campaigning for Papuan independence from Indonesia. This has compounded concerns among the Jakarta-based elites. The real question is now why the Indonesian government seems to have been unable to diffuse the internationalization of the Papuan issue, particularly at the regional level. Several reasons lie behind the ineffectiveness of Indonesia foreign policy in handling the Papuan independence issue in the Pacific. Generally, a lack of coordination between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other parts of government has led to the lack of a single policy to diffuse the independence push. There is a need to align what happens on the ground with what is presented to the international community. Papuans' political and cultural aspirations are met with heavy-handed treatment by Indonesian security apparatus. But the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has denied this. Rather, it has repeatedly stated at international forums that conditions have improved significantly despite human rights reports showing otherwise. Another instance of rhetoric not matching reality is the fact that although Indonesian President Joko Widodo has promised that there would be no restrictions on foreign journalists traveling to Papua, there have been no specific policies to implement such a promise. Any foreign journalist who wants to visit Papua still has to obtain permission through complicated procedures and follow strict requirements, particularly from security agencies, and occasionally without coordination with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. For years, the Pacific has not been a diplomatic priority for the Indonesian government. There is no single agency with the foreign affairs bureaucracy that mainly focuses on Pacific countries. As a result, many Indonesian diplomats lack the competence to respond to the Papuan independence campaign currently gaining traction across the Pacific region. Indonesia lacks strong diplomatic relationship with Pacific states, even though formal diplomatic relations with countries such as Papua New Guinea and Fiji were established in 1980s. In any case, the Indonesian government has not learned from its past actions related to separatist movement. In the case of East Timor, the Indonesian government underestimated the role of Fretilin Group and its charismatic diplomat, the chief, which by the name of Jose Ramos Horta. Ineffective diplomacy in the Pacific and elsewhere is hampering Indonesia's ability to counter the internationalization of pro-independence narratives, and with that, its ability to promote solutions to the Papuan conflict that emphasize dialogue between the Indonesian government and its Melanesian citizens.